"Please save my baby," begged the single mom, but when the millionaire looked into her eyes, everything changed. "Please, my baby, he's seizing!" Teresa Carter's desperate plea cut through the roar of the rain and the distant thunder, echoing in the marble-hushed entrance of the Manhattan restaurant. At 9 p.m., the city stood caught between two worlds, shimmering warmth inside and a ruthless cold outside. The wind sliced through her threadbare coat, turning it into a whispered apology for warmth. She knelt on the slick pavement, clutching Lucas, her golden-made 2-year-old, his lips turning purple, his body shaking against her trembling arms. "Help me!" she sobbed into the storm, her voice nearly lost in the gale. Her hair plastered against her face, she felt utterly powerless, watching his small chest spasm beneath her coat. Inside, well-dressed diners sipped wine under soft lighting, unaware of the suffering only steps away. The wheels of a sleek black SUV rolled to a stop at the curb. Michael Bennett, 33, tech CEO and billionaire, sat inside. His tailored black suit and crisp white shirt betrayed no warmth. With one last click of a luxury dining app, he prepared to step out, to head home, to leave this damp street to its shadows. His phone buzzed with post-meeting messages. He raised his hand, expecting the driver's window to descend on command, when a frantic sound tore him from routine. A woman's scream. He hesitated. He peered sideways through the rain-streaked window. There, kneeling on the curb, a young blonde woman clutching a child. The child's limbs trembled violently, and the mother's voice trembled with a terror that cut deeper than any winter chill. The woman locked eyes with him and stumbled forward to the SUV's window. Her voice trembled. "Please, sir, help my baby. He's dying. I have no car. No one else is stopping." Michael's hand hovered at the button to roll down the window. He stared silently, wariness flickering behind his calm facade. "Is this a scam? Are you trying to set me up?" he asked, his tone calm but clipped. "Please, I swear I'm not a thief." Teresa's voice cracked as she shook in the rain. "My son? Look at him. Just look." Michael's gaze dropped to the child slumped against his mother's chest. Lucas's face, contorted in agony, struck him with jarring clarity. He saw flashes of himself at that age, same golden hair, same helplessness, and the memory stabbed him warm and cruel. His own mother, broken and silent under a hospital light, begging for help he could never call in time. In that instant, Michael acted. He opened the SUV door and stepped out into the rain. Water soaked his suit, but he moved without hesitation. He gave the driver a curt command, "Open the back seat. Now." The driver obeyed, silently, as Teresa sobbed, her posture crumpled against the cold. Michael knelt beside her, gently shifting Lucas into his arms. His voice was low, commanding yet soft. "Get in, quickly. We're going to the hospital." Teresa lifted her head for the first time, her tear-streaked face shining with something like hope. Without words, she gave Lucas into his care. Michael held the boy close to his chest, as the rain continued its quiet assault on their shared moment. She climbed in after them, collapsing into the seat. Lucas whimpered softly against Michael's chest. The billionaire CEO sat driver's side and barked directions to the driver before turning to Teresa. "Stay calm. We'll get him help." As the SUV pulled away from the restaurant, the golden lights of the city blurred through the rain. Inside the vehicle, Teresa wrapped her arms protectively around Lucas, leaning into his savior. Michael, sleeves soaked and heart pounding, stared straight ahead at the slick streets. He remembered a promise he had made years ago, to never let fear stop him from doing what was right. Now he faced the reason behind it, a son he had long forgotten he could love again. The ambulance doors closed behind them. In the back of the ER waiting area, Teresa sat on a hard plastic chair, Lucas in her lap, his tiny body heavy and limp. The rain-soaked SUV stood just outside, headlights half blinded by wet glass. Teresa pressed her forehead gently against Lucas's temple and whispered into the slick fabric of his hoodie. her voice trembling. "I lost my job last week. No health insurance, no safety net. I don't know what we'll do now." She glanced up, tear tracks still warm on her cheeks, and found Michael standing by the reception desk, arms crossed. His suit was soaked and his usually immaculate hair was slicked down by rain. He looked imposing and distant, still the commanding tech CEO she'd seen on magazine covers, not the man who had cradled her son just hours ago. A doctor in scrubs approached, her expression professional but tired. "Ms. Carter? I'm Dr. Morgan. I'll explain Lucas's condition." Teresa steadied herself. "It's pneumonia, severe. He has a high fever and early signs of sepsis. We need to admit him overnight and start intravenous antibiotics." Her voice softened. "Unfortunately, the treatment is costly. The hospital requires payment arrangements before we can begin." Teresa's breath caught in her chest. I don't have insurance," she croaked. She couldn't finish the sentence. Lucas began to stir, whimpering softly, and she instinctively rocked him. Dr. Morgan offered a sympathetic nod. "We'll give you some time to make arrangements." As the doctor walked away, Teresa sank further into her seat, clutching Lucas like he was all she had left. Michael remained by the counter, silent, observing the flurry of nurses and worried parents around them. He had offered to pay, but he hadn't spoken a word since the doctor's announcement. Minutes felt like hours. Teresa unwrapped Lucas's small hand, sliding her thumb between his fingers. He shivered. She blew warm air across his forehead. Finally, he began to cry again, not from fever, but from fear. The panic that had gripped her heart years ago returned with such force it nearly knocked her to her knees. She turned to Michael, voice shaking. I can't pay for this. I can't." Michael stepped forward, pulling a credit card from the breast pocket of his wetsuit coat. He laid it flat on the desk, toward the nurse, completing their forms. "Run everything. Treat him like he's my own child." The nurse looked startled, but registered the weight behind his words. She nodded and quickly processed the admission. Teresa stared at the card. Her tears came again, the emotional dam finally broken. Why? Why would someone like you do this for someone like me?" Her voice was a whisper, raw and breathless. "I don't even know your name." Michael didn't smile, he was too solemn for that, but he turned to face her. His eyes, so often cool and reserved, wavered on something tender. "My name is Michael Bennett," he said softly, "and you don't need to know my name to know this. That child in your arms needed someone who could act. Now I will." A nurse took Lucas down the hall, and Teresa stood to watch. She turned back to Michael, voice thick. "I don't know how to thank you." He offered a slight nod. "There's no thanks needed," he said quietly. Then he paused. "Stay here, I'll be right back." Teresa watched him walk toward a wage teller station on the other side of the ward. He handed the nurse an authorization scrawl. She accepted it with a nod. Afterward, Michael returned, looking calmer, resolute. He slid a small medical care bag across to Teresa, gently encouraging. "This might help until things are settled." She reached out and accepted it, thumbs trembling over the clasp. "Thank you." Her voice cracked again, but this time the tears were different, not from fear, but from hope. Michael gave a small, respectful nod. "He's going to be okay." As he stepped away into the shadowed corridor, Teresa looked down at Lucas's sleeping face. The hospital lights softened around them. In the distance, she heard Michael's voice politely speak with another nurse, making sure everything was in order, and for the first time that night, she believed it. The bar was quiet, too quiet for a man who had spent most of his life in boardrooms and corner offices. Michael sat alone at a dimly lit table, a single glass of scotch in front of him, untouched. The late-night glare of neon signs seeped through the window behind him, casting ribbons of light across his lapel. He stared at the amber liquid, tracing its slow, circular motions with a distant gaze. Each swirl returned him to another night, years ago. His mother, gaunt and pale, lay on a narrow hospital bed under harsh fluorescent lights. The doctor's words still echoed. "We can't treat her unless you pay now. No insurance." Michael had been 9. He had clutched his mother's hand, heard her whisper, "I will be okay, baby," even as her breathing stopped. He remembered clutching dollar bills he had folded with childish care, hoping they could heal what money couldn't. They couldn't. He had left that hospital with her body and his resolve. Never again would money fail someone in his care. The scotch sat untouched as he remembered the choices he made after. He had married success, climbed ladder after ladder, built an empire on his brilliance and resolve. Love, sentiment, vulnerability, those were weaknesses he could not afford. Success required certainty, not heart. It demanded a fortress of control. There was no room in that fortress for a child's laughter, for a nurse's quiet prayer, for a woman's tear-streaked face under a rain-soaked sky. There was only him, and the relentless pulse of profit. Tonight, the fortress walls shook, because when he looked at the sleeping form of Lucas, he glimpsed a courage he had never known. Because when Teresa's voice cracked with exhaustion, but still begged help, he realized he cared enough to act. He cared enough to stop. Something in him demanded the stillness that followed the storm outside that hospital. He picked up the glass and drank. The scotch bit with heat, but not enough to numb him. It inflamed something. A question. A crack in the relentless logic he had always relied on. What had he been living for? Success? Awards? Boards? He shook his head and drained the glass in one gulp. Then he swept the scotch aside, a decidedly final gesture. Tonight, this fortress would be tested. At the hospital, he remembered the weight of tiny Lucas in his arms as Teresa had settled into a chair. He saw how terrified Teresa was, but also how her golden hair clung to her face in damp strands that framed her desperation and determination. She was scared, but not broken. He respected that. He admired it. He thought of all the mothers he had ignored during his climb, the ones too stressed to watch their children laugh, too overworked to listen to giggles before bed. He had convinced himself that real problems were hard numbers on balance sheets, not heartbeats in hospital beds. But tonight, after watching Lucas's pulse steady, after wiping Teresa's tears, he knew something had changed. He thought of the credit card he'd placed on the desk, the words he'd quietly said, "Treat him like he's my own." Those words felt heavier than any board approval he had ever given. They were a decision and a risk. They meant everything, if the world had eyes on him. Yet there was fear, too. What if helping one golden-hated woman and her trembling son unraveled the carefully constructed world he had built? What if emotion was a liability he no longer wished to bear? He stretched and ran a hand through his hair, slick and cut like corporate armor. In that moment, he realized he was tired. Tired of the fortress, tired of pretending that love was convenient. He drained the glass again and set it on the bar. He left the money, to tip for the drink, and stood. He walked to the mirror behind the bar and met his own eyes. A man wearing power and wealth, but haunted by the memory of his mother dying alone, by a child's tremor under rain. He had chosen success to prevent that moment from repeating, but maybe now, success meant something more than profit. He turned and pushed through the bar's glass door into the cold night air. Rain hit him like a baptism, and for the first time, he welcomed it. Tonight, he would return to the hospital. Tonight, he would see Teresa. He would see Lucas, because despite the cold he had buried inside himself, something warm had broken through, and he did not intend to let it slip back away. It was the third morning since Lucas's admission, and every day Michael found himself returning to the same children's ward that, in just days, had become the most important place in his life. The hospital's fluorescent lights no longer felt harsh. Somewhere in these white halls he'd rediscovered something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. He entered Lucas's room to find the boy sitting up in bed, surrounded by plush toys. Michael brought cookies, a board game, and 2 comic books, one in English, one in Spanish. Lucas lit up. "Uncle Michael!" he squealed. leaping off the bed and into his arms. Michael chuckled, lowering them both to the floor. "Hey, buddy, feeling better?" "Better, because you came." The words hit Michael harder than he expected. He helped Lucas unwrap a cookie, wiped a few crumbs from his cheek, then opened the comic book and began reading. Lucas followed along, eyes wide, turning pages with careful fingers. At the doorway, Teresa stood watching. She looked tired, worn, but calmer, more grounded. Her eyes lingered on Michael as he sat cross-legged on the hospital floor, Lucas curled beside him. She saw a man who could have been anywhere, but chose here. Lucas grinned. "Uncle Michael, will you play Legos with me?" Michael nodded. "Sure. Teach me how to build that castle." They built side by side, laughing when the structure wobbled. "Needs a bigger base," Lucas said. Michael smiled. "We'll redesign it together." From across the room, Teresa smiled faintly. Lucas noticed and whispered, "Mommy's watching." Michael glanced up and gave her a nod. She returned it with quiet gratitude. Later, as Michael stood to stretch, he said, "Want something from the cafeteria? Cookies or apple juice?" "Apple juice." He left and wandered the halls, thoughts circling. At the cafeteria, he picked up juice and cookies, and for a moment remembered his mother, how she might have wanted someone to sit beside her in a place like this. When he returned, he handed Lucas the juice, then noticed Teresa had moved closer. She gave him a soft thank you. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "I like being here." "I noticed. You're here. Every day." "He's fighting," Michael replied, "so I'm here." She sat beside them as Lucas munched happily. "It means a lot," she whispered. Michael looked at her, voice quiet. "He means a lot to me." "To us," she said, almost inaudibly. They played, read, and laughed through the next hour. Lucas built a lopsided tower. Michael helped. Teresa joined in, her exhaustion fading as she sat closer. Later, as the visitors thinned, Teresa spoke. "I can't thank you enough, but I want to help you somehow." Michael shook his head. "You're doing everything just by being his mother." "I don't know how to repay you." Michael looked at her, no hesitation now. Stay with us." Lucas looked up and said, "Uncle Michael, you break all my walls." Michael swallowed, meeting Teresa's eyes. His walls, once built of cold success, were crumbling, and in their place something warmer was growing. Rain tapped softly at the windows, and for the first time, a different kind of future felt possible, a future chosen, together. Michael awoke to the buzz of unread notifications on his phone, share alerts, retweets, news updates, headlines growing louder by the minute. He slid on his suit jacket and walked out onto the balcony of his penthouse, glittering New York lights beneath him. That's when he felt the tremor. His phone lit up, delivering a notification that would change everything. Tech billionaire Michael Bennett caught in secret romance with single waitress, the headline declared across multiple tabloids and business outlets. The article featured a grainy photograph, Michael cradling a sick child outside a hospital, the mother weeping beside them. It was intimate but torn from a moment Michael had shared only with hope and responsibility. The image swept across media channels. The stock ticker for Bennett Technologies plunged. His world shook. Within an hour, his phone rang non-stop. His board demanded answers. His assistant buzzed with panic. Michael pressed the phone to his ear and walked downstairs to the hospital. He hated that this scandal had dragged him from the most important bedside. He found Teresa sitting on a bench outside Lucas's room, head in her hands. She looked like a ghost, thin, overexposed, shrouded in stress and heartache. He took a breath and sat beside her. "What happened?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "I don't know. It got leaked online after someone took photos." He pulled up the article on his phone and scrolled. Clips from his interview started, rehashing snippets from a conversation between him and Teresa. "My son. I lost my job last week. Can't pay." They framed it as scandalous, like she'd manipulated him. He slammed the phone shut. "Did you use me?" he asked, voice low. "Did you do this on purpose? Did someone pay you to bring me into media?" Tears ran down Teresa's cheeks as she looked at him in disbelief. No, Michael, I thought you were different. I never wanted publicity. I swear I never asked for anything except your help for Lucas." He stood to leave. "Then why are we trending?" "I don't know," she cried. "I swear what I told you was real. Our son was dying. I needed help. I thought you were different." Michael's face hardened. His siblings had once called him cold, and in that moment he became colder still. "I will not let you drag me into scandal," he said, voice brittle. "I will not be a showpiece." Teresa stood, wrapping her arms around herself. "I just wanted you to know the truth." He narrowed his gaze, holding back his anger and confusion. "I thought you were someone I could trust." Another crisis? Another betrayal? The word cut deep. Her tears flowed freely now. "I'm sorry. He cut her off. "Save your apologies." Then he turned and walked away, heavy-footed, leaving Teresa trembling in the hospital corridor. He got into a slow elevator back to the street, away from the danger he once believed he had found in his arms. Michael drove through the night, adrenaline and shame colliding. By 2 a.m., the media frenzy hadn't cooled. By 3 a.m., even tabloids were questioning whether his heart had been used as a plaything. He realized that in trying to help, he had exposed himself, his legacy, his company, and his vulnerability. But at 6 a.m., with the sun rising cold over the Hudson, he knew he couldn't back out. This wasn't a transaction. Not anymore. Before dawn, he was back outside the hospital, phone in hand, waiting. Inside the ward, Teresa rubbed Lucas's forehead. His fever had broken, but he still slept deeply. Clouds of relief and uncertainty hovered in her mind. She didn't know if Michael would return, if the man she'd come to trust, the one who'd brought light into her darkest days, would stand by them. She hadn't slept. She thought she might have hallucinated him in the hallway. Now, those footsteps approached, and there he was, Michael. He stopped at the doorway and asked, voice quiet and rough, "Can I come in?" Tears filled her eyes, and she nodded. "We do this," he said, "on our terms. Not as a headline in some piece of gossip. Understand?" She nodded again, her hands flying to his arm. Michael knelt beside Lucas, brushing his hand through her hair and squeezing Teresa's shoulder. "Lucas doesn't need a headline. He needs us. I choose to be here." And that night, without any more words, they found their footing again. Together, real and unbreakable. Lucas walked out of Franklin Regional Medical Center that afternoon with his small hand tightly curled around his mother's finger. The hospital lights glowed behind them as Teresa paused at the automatic doors, hugging her coat tighter. Lucas no longer trembled. His fever had broken, and his cough had all but subsided. Still, the memory of that night, his tiny body struggling for air, was etched into her mind with painful clarity. In the weeks that followed, Teresa packed their meager belongings and found refuge in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Stamford, Connecticut. It was a quiet place, far from the buzz of New York City, where the tabloids had splashed Michael Bennett's name across every front page. She found work waiting tables at a diner on the edge of town. Early shifts, late shifts, whatever she could get. The pay was minimal, but it was honest. It meant they could start again. Each evening after Lucas slept, Teresa would sit at the small wooden desk by the window and open his spiral notebook. Inside were dozens of drawings he'd made in the hospital and after. Pictures of Daddy Michael and Mommy Teresa, standing under a bright sun, hearts around them, and always Lucas sandwiched between them. His letters were wobbly but sweet. Daddy Michael and Mommy Teresa love forever. Every night she traced the lines with her finger and felt a bittersweet ache in her chest. If only she could believe those words fully again. She stopped returning Michael's calls and messages. They had no clear relationship. He was just a man who had stepped in when she needed help. But when the photo scandal had hit, her world had collapsed again. She told herself Anthony couldn't cause more harm if she pushed him away for good. Her first few shifts at the diner were a blur, Coffee pots, order slips, clinking dishes. Every time she rang the register and saw her name light up on the screen, she was reminded of how far they had come and how close they'd almost fallen apart. No customers recognized her, and no one asked about the scandal in Manhattan. Stanford didn't want her story. It let her be invisible. That, at least, was peaceful. But the nights were harder. After Lucas fell asleep, she would stare out the window at the distant city skyline, wondering what Michael was doing. She caught herself imagining his face, stern and weathered, the same face that once softened when he held her son. She wondered if he still thought of them. Lucas would wake sometimes, sleepwalking or calling for Daddy Michael in his dreams. Teresa would wake to his whispered voice and hold him tight, heart breaking all over again. She wanted to believe he would come back, but every phone call she declined, every text she left unanswered, felt like another nail in Hope's coffin. Work became routine, but she struggled to focus. Her arms ached from carrying trays, her feet felt bruised from standing all day. As she filed orders at the counter one night, she paused, hands shaking around the coffee carafe. Her friend and coworker, Janet, watched with concern. "You okay?" Janet asked softly. Teresa nodded. "Just tired," she replied. "Long day." But maybe she was tired of being afraid, but she didn't know how to stop. Then came the nights when Lucas would draw again. At bedtime, "Mommy, can I show you?" He would hold up a fresh page. Again the three of them, a tall man, a golden-maid mother, and a smiling child. She would hug him close. "That's beautiful, baby," and she would tuck him in, whispering, "I love you more than anything." Alone, the notebook opened before her. She would stare at the images and the crooked letters, Daddy Michael and Mommy Teresa, love forever. The kitchen light flickered as she closed the notebook and pursed her lips. Did she want that forever, or was it still just a drawing? She didn't know. She just knew Lucas needed more than shadows. He needed answers. And so did she. It was nearly midnight when Michael's phone buzzed with an urgent ring. Half asleep, he glanced at the caller ID and felt his heart seize. Hospital emergency. The hallucinatory blur of Stanford's quiet suburbs vanished instantly as adrenaline surged. He grabbed his keys, threw on a coat, and bolted out the apartment. Outside, rain began to fall again, a familiar, oppressive patter that marked his inner turmoil. He didn't hesitate. He slammed the door, fumbled in the dark, and raced toward his car, the black SUV waiting like a loyal sentinel. He started the engine, pulled out, and the roar of the highway swallowed him whole. All that mattered was one name, Lucas. The hospital corridors were hushed, bathed in pale fluorescent light. Nurse Patterson stood near the door of a private room, concern etched across her lined face. She saw Michael enter, breathless. "She won't call you," she said softly, referring to Teresa in the room. "But the boy, he calls for you every night." Michael swallowed hard and nodded, his jaw clenched. He didn't ask why she hadn't called him. Instead, he pushed forward toward the door. Inside, the scene broke his heart. Teresa sat slumped beside the bed, exhaustion weighing on her as thick as the silence. She held Lucas's hand lightly, tears glittering on her cheeks. Lucas lay asleep in the hospital bed, tubes attached, his small chest rising in shallow breaths. He had suffered another seizure. The doctors said it was a complication related to his pneumonia and past infection. Michael paused at the threshold. The woman he had abandoned stood there, battered by fatigue and grief. But his son was in trouble again. Their eyes met. Teresa's gaze was locked on the bed. She hadn't turned away when he walked in, but she hadn't looked at him either. Silence hung over them like thick curtain. Michael took a step forward and draped a warm hospital blanket over them both. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice not loud enough to disturb Lucas. "I was a coward, but not anymore." Teresa's head jerked up, her expression a painful mix of relief and disbelief. She blinked back tears, reacting to the vulnerability in his tone again. Michael knelt beside the bed. He took Lucas's free hand in his own and closed his eyes for a moment. "I'm here now, little man," he murmured. "You're not alone." "Not anymore." Lucas stirred but didn't wake. Teresa reached over and brushed a strand of her hair from his forehead. She met Michael's gaze, the floodgates of suppressed pain cracking wide open. "I thought I lost him," she said in a broken whisper. "I thought that night was the end." Michael's eyes glistened. "You weren't alone, and I won't walk away again." She closed her eyes, leaning forward to press her forehead against his arm. He slid an arm around her shoulders, enfolding mother and son in a shaky, protective embrace. Time stretched. Teresa drifted into a half-sleep, leaning on Michael's chest, tears drying on her cheeks. He felt every breath she took. In that stark hospital room, with the beeping monitors and the sterile scent, they were raw and exposed, but they were together. The night guard stepped in for brief check-in, finding them locked in that embrace. "I'll grab you coffee if you want," he offered. Michael nodded, managing a stiff smile. As he stood to wait, Teresa let out a soft breath and stood on shaky legs. She cleared her throat. "Thank you," she said, just 2 words but full of meaning. Michael met her eyes. "No more running," he said. "This time I'll stay." She nodded once. "He needs you," he nodded back. "And so do you." Morning light seeped through the curtains. Teresa gazed at Lucas sleeping peacefully. Michael stood behind her, hands on her shoulders. Neither had spoken overnight. The crisis that had loomed in darkness had passed, but its echo remained. She turned in his arms. "Can we?" He interrupted with a soft kiss on her forehead. "Yes, we can." Together they stepped forward to meet the day and heal wounds their separate tragedies had left behind. The morning in Hartford, Connecticut was crisp and bright as Michael and Teresa stepped onto the stage, flanked by media lights and cameras. Behind them, a banner read, "New Beginnings Foundation, supporting single mothers and babies." Lucas, in a tiny suit and suspenders, clutched a polished wooden care box at their feet. Michael adjusted his tie, gently placing a hand on Teresa's back. She took a deep breath and faced the crowd. The press release had just gone out. Michael Bennett, the once unreachable tech mogul, would be the foundation's lead sponsor. Teresa Carter, survivor and mother, would serve as co-director. This was not a publicity stunt, it was purpose. Michael stepped to the mic first. "We're not here because of a headline," he said. "We're here because of what we've lived, a story of courage, of love, and the need for no family to ever feel alone in a hospital hallway. Teresa doesn't need saving, I do. For her compassion, her strength, her truth." He stepped back. Teresa took the mic, her golden hair catching the morning light. "I wasn't looking for a hero," she said, voice steady. "Just someone who believed in us." And he did. That changed everything. Applause erupted. Michael squeezed her hand. Lucas raised his care box with a proud grin, drawing more smiles. Weeks later, on a sun-drenched afternoon, a small chapel near the Connecticut River came alive with music and laughter. White roses lined the aisle. Guests, foundation staff, close friends, nurses who had once saved Lucas filled the pews. Lucas, in his ring-bearer suit, clutched a velvet box holding the wedding bands. Michael stood at the altar, heart full. When Teresa appeared in an ivory lace gown, sunlight catching her hair, his breath caught. Her smile was soft, her step sure. She carried a bouquet of wildflowers, sunflowers, blue delphinium, white roses. The officiant began, "We are gathered here to witness a new beginning, proof that love finds us even in the darkest storms." Michael and Teresa met at the center. Lucas handed them the rings with pride. They placed them on each other's fingers, then turned toward him. Together, they lifted his hand into theirs. "I now pronounce you family," the officiant said. "Michael, Teresa, and Lucas, may your love build a home stronger than any one of you alone." They kissed. Guests cheered. Outside on the lawn, a vintage convertible waited. They climbed in, Michael at the wheel, Teresa beside him, Lucas perched on the back. Later, Parked in a quiet grove by the river, they stepped into the grass. The sky was pink with fading gold. Michael knelt, then looked up at the two who had changed his life. "Your courage saved all three of us," he told Teresa, voice full. He turned to Lucas. "And you built this family out of love." Lucas beamed, pride glowing. Teresa leaned in and whispered, "And your heart finally found its home." Michael stood, pulling her close. He lifted Lucas into his arms. Together they stood, a family, imperfect but whole, scarred but fearless. And as they walked hand in hand through the meadow toward a new life, somewhere between Stanford and Manhattan, their story became more than survival. It became a testament that when a mother cries, "Please help my baby," and love listens, miracles follow. Always. And that was the story of a mother's desperate plea, a stranger's unexpected kindness, and a love that turned fear into forever. Because sometimes, what begins with a single cry in the night can echo into a lifetime of healing. Sometimes, the strongest families are the ones we choose. And sometimes, even a man who thought he had everything finds out what truly matters, through the eyes of a child. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the quiet power of showing up for someone else, we invite you to like, share, and most importantly, subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories. Here, we believe that every heart has a story worth telling, and that the right story at the right time can change everything. Until next time, keep believing in love, in second chances, and in the people who never stop choosing you.